This is The Bandwagon, a show about baseball and Seattle. I'm Hannah Kaiser, a baseball writer at Yahoo Sports, joined as always by Zach Crizer, a baseball writer at Yahoo Sports as well. Zach, I was talking to someone at the All-Star game yesterday. We're going to really back into this, but I was talking to someone at the All-Star game who is a listener of our podcast. So hi to my MLB Now producer who's listening perhaps to this episode as well. Maybe not, though, because we're going to talk about an event that he was at. And he was like, I just realized that you and Zach's last names rhyme. And he said he hadn't noticed because I don't let you say your own name. Like I put too much distance between our names. So I'm Hannah Kaiser.
And I'm Zach Crizer.
Yeah,
and this does come up a lot, especially when we pick up credentials from the same booth at various events. They're like, wait, that's the same name.
We work at the same place. Our names are similar. We are not related. So spelling is not similar. You cannot look for them in the same place. Different parts of the alphabet. Okay, that was a very roundabout way of getting into saying that we are both still in Seattle.
Yes.
Where the All-Star festivities took place. All-Star's not really an event that needs to be like recapped necessarily from like a strictly what happened in the game baseball perspective. The National League won. Do you remember the score? Was that part of your quiz? Was your quiz just going to be, do you remember the score of the All-Star game?
I did not do the do you remember the score quiz. The score was 3-2. Elias Diaz from the Colorado Rockies, the catcher, hit a go-ahead home run late in the game, and then Craig Kimbrell had a sort of stressful save closeout situation, but he got it done. And Craig Kimbrell also pitched in the game the last time the National League won the All-Star game, which was in 2012. It's been a while.
Fun. I did not know that. We should like downplay the All-Star game at the outset of our podcast about the All-Star game, or rather I should say at the outset of our podcast about the All-Star event, because that's really the tricky thing to discuss, is that like I haven't been covering baseball for decades or whatever, but perhaps at some point it was merely a game that took place. Now it is a whole slate of events. It includes things that are not at all related to All-Star, like the draft, like Rob Manfred doing a press conference. And so even if the game itself is kind of a strange event from a coverage perspective, because it's like, once you get to the game on Tuesday, which is the last part of the All-Star festivities, once you get to the game on Tuesday, you're kind of just like, okay, yeah, now they play one extremely meaningless baseball game, and most of the players leave before the game is even over. But a lot happens before that point, which is why we are so tired right now.
Yeah, I think something I just want to, how the sausage is made situation for people, something they may not realize is during pretty much every other baseball game and event you've ever seen, all the players stay in the dugout and in the clubhouse, and then we talk to all of them after the game is over. During the All-Star game, they just start leaving in the middle, and reporters have to stand outside the clubhouses under the boughs of the stadium while the game is still going to talk to anyone who has already exited the game. Or sometimes players who were never even in the game.
Yes.
Like Kodai Senga never pitched, but he did a availability in like the 6th inning. So that is where you were.
Yes, where I was. And I'm not going to put anyone on blast, but like, we've now hyped up how uninteresting the All-Star game itself is. This actually was a very interesting end, or it could have been an interesting end. It proved not to be an interesting end, but it looked like it might be an interesting end when hometown hero Julio Rodriguez stepped to the plate with 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th and the AL down by a run and a guy on first who had just walked and whatever. And that moment, everyone who was standing, like waiting for various players. And at that point, it was a lot of people because it was the bottom of the 9th inning. And so there's all the media, a lot of different PR people, a lot of families, like of people. Shohei Ohtani's translator, Ipe, was there with Ipe's family. And I was like, oh my God, I've never thought about Ipe having a family, but here they are. And Shohei Ohtani's agent was there. So lots and lots of people are sort of in the various halls. Like MLB officials, truly an insane number of people in the broader baseball world are at All-Star. So we're in Seattle this week, and a lot of them were in the bowels of the stadium waiting to talk to baseball players. Anyway, my point is the game was very tense. We're all watching the TV because we've just been shooting the for the entire time that we've been down there. Because again, not that interesting of a game. But then it got really interesting, and everyone was really hushed and quiet and watching the TV. And some baseball players walked by and barely glanced at the TV. Like baseball players on their way out in their all-star red carpet outfits with their families. And they were just like, what's that? Oh, the game might get decided right now. And then just kept right on walking.
Time to beat the traffic.
They were like, okay, bye. That's our recap of the game. Should we go roughly? We're into the banter section of the podcast, by the way. We do have we have a game. You have a game. You built a game. We have a game. We do have a main topic that's like only very extremely tangentially all-star related. What was your favorite part? That's a dumb question. We'll see where we go from here.
I'm not going to answer that question. I'm just going to say something else.
Oh, okay.
I was going to mention the just ubiquity of Shohei Ohtani here, even though it was not like he was hosting the All-Star game or anything. He was just everywhere. Everyone was talking about him. All the players were talking about him. The fans broke into a come to Seattle chant every time he did anything in the game at all. And it just feels like we are plowing toward about 6 months of baseball being a Shohei Ohtani enterprise with the occasional World Series thrown in. It is, really hard. I mean, I saw a storefront with a free Shohei sign in it. I don't know if this level of campaigning is happening in other cities or if it was an all-star phenomenon specifically because, perhaps there is some connection because the Mariners had Ichiro. They have had a lot of really prominent Japanese players, and maybe they think that is a draw for Ohtani, which is reasonable. I don't know, maybe. But it was just all over the place.
Yeah, I haven't totally turned my brain on to seeing everything in baseball through the Shohei Ohtani lens. But you're right, this was like an interesting intro to that. In the way that, do Mariners fans see him more because he's in the same division? Do they feel like the Mariners have a legit shot? Like, it is interesting to think, like, to your point, like, now that we live in a Shohei Ohtani world where baseball is secondary, from here on out, will the various baseball cities and fan bases diverge into their respective, like, how likely do we think Shohei Ohtani is going to be? Like, are we going to start seeing, so like you said, like you saw the free Shohei sign and you were like, I wonder if this is in other cities. It's like, I don't know, probably not in, pick a city, Baltimore, Kansas City.
Yeah, I don't think
will we start seeing those in New York? You know, it's like, will cities start to like stake out their, like, how hopeful are we about Shohei Ohtani? I mean, it's really interesting because it's always true that he's the most interesting player. And you don't have to go very long from a time perspective to be reminded that it's the most interesting thing happening in baseball. Like, in the regular season, it comes up pretty frequently. It's 2 home runs in a game, or has a great start, or has a blister and everybody freaks out. But for now, 3 All-Star games in a row, I guess, it really does peak at all. Like, every All-Star, like, from a personal perspective, because I don't see him regularly. I don't live in Anaheim or Los Angeles for that matter. And I don't see teams that play in his division. That, like, All-Star is the time at which I am always the most reminded that, like, it's really wild from a human experience. Like, as interesting as the baseball and all of it is, the most interesting untold story of baseball right now is, like, what does Shohei Ohtani think? Like, it's such a weird, when All-Star happens and everyone's in one place and everyone's trying to come up with content, and you see all the media of all kinds looking for the most interesting story and consistently landing on Ohtani, it really drives home how much, like, he is experiencing this all the time, and we have no concept of it. Would he like to get away from it? Does he relish it? Like, he did, when he came out of the game, everybody talks when they come out of the game. Usually they talk right outside their clubhouses. They brought him to the interview room, of course. And, like, they said, Shohei Ohtani will be available in the interview room in 5 minutes or whatever. Made my way to the interview room, opened the door, already packed. Like, cameras across the back of the wall, like, every seat taken. I was like, oh, okay. Everywhere he goes. And then I was thinking about it from his perspective. I was like, every door that he opens looks like that.
That's
you know what I mean?
just
Like,
his life. Yes.
For me, it's only when I'm entering the room that Shohei Ohtani is going to be in. But he's always going to the room that Shohei Ohtani is going to be in.
Yeah, I took a video during pregame warmups yesterday where, everyone's just standing around watching batting practice, pretty static, stationary. And then Ohtani finished his warmups in the outfield and was walking back into the dugout and into the clubhouse. And it was just like a wave. It was like you put a stationary camera on the sand at the beach and then the water came. That was just like all the people who were just following Shohei Ohtani, not because he wanted them to, just because they, every time he moves a muscle is a time to take a picture or video of Shohei Ohtani.
I mean, there is so many factors contributing to that. Like, there's the fact that we haven't seen a two-way player of his caliber ever before. There's the fact that all Japanese players have an outsized media presence because there is a contingent of media that is most interested in what they do and sometimes only interested in what they do. And then also there's the impending free agency. So it's like there's like all of these factors combining. My friend Bridgeroli like tweeted. She also went to the Shohei Ohtani sits in the press conference and answers some questions room. And she tweeted something that he said. And she was like, it's insane. Like, if you tweet anything Ohtani says, within minutes, you just have like 1,000 retweets. And it's like, it could be completely uninteresting. And it's the only news, which brings us to the only news anybody cares about Ohtani is like, where's he going to go?
And he offered absolutely no, he's not going to tell you. He doesn't know. So it's.
We'll get to this later in the podcast because I'm previewing my bandwagon a little bit there. But like, we've all been conditioned enough that when asked about like, what'd you think of the crowds and the city? And he was like, I love Seattle. I was immediately like, oh, he said he loves Seattle. Like, I've been conditioned to be like, I was like looking around like, did everybody hear that? He said he loves Seattle. We'll talk about that later. Okay, we can't just talk about Ohtani. But the last thing I will say is that like, he did this little media scrum. People ask him questions. He doesn't say anything that interesting. That's not to his discredit. That's just probably self-preservation right there. But one of the questions was like, and this is true, I've seen it happen. One of the questions was, at this kind of event, everybody's asking the various All-Stars, who's your favorite player? And everybody says you. And the question was, so who's your favorite player? And I just thought it was so interesting. Like, doesn't even acknowledge the part where everybody says him. And I don't think that's ego. Like, it was like,
what's he going to say? Yeah.
That's just the context. Context is everybody else says you're the best. So who does the best think is the best? And it does feel like we've been writing that story for every All-Star game that Ohtani, like 2 years ago, I wrote that story. I was like, who do they all think the best player is Ohtani? So before that, I think you had better seats than I did for the Derby.
I probably did have better seats than you, other than almost getting taken out by Adley Rutschman a couple times before he switched to batting right-handed. They were very good seats. I was in the auxiliary press box, which is really just like suite level seats in the outfield and right field up high. So got a pretty good view of the fireworks, also the actual fireworks, which sent smoke into our box.
There were fireworks?
But yeah, every time like any event started, they shot off a bunch of fireworks. During the anthem each night, they shot off fireworks, which were very loud from where we were sitting. But the real story of the Derby, even though Vlad Jr. won the Derby, the real story was Seattle people were so in the tank for Julio Rodriguez that it made it difficult to tell when other people were hitting homers because they were just not interested in those.
Like, to a degree that we're not going to be able to convince you of, because if you were watching the broadcast on TV, I'm sure it was more obvious when a round started because they were like focusing on the guy standing at home plate taking massive swings. But as people who were in the ballpark whose job it was to be paying attention to the home run derby, I kept not noticing that that guys other than Julio Rodriguez had started their rounds because just no indication from the noise level, the vibe in the ballpark until he stepped to the plate. Like, at one point I looked down and I think it was Randy had like 35 home runs, and I was like, when did this round start? There's no one. It's just like a quiet, low level hum in the ballpark.
It was like they were trying to. It was some sort of intentional campaign to deprive the other guys of adrenaline or something. I mean, it was very noticeable. They booed whoever was actually facing Julio, and then all the other guys they just sort of ignored. And it was a pretty, and then it was a real social experiment once Julio got knocked out. It's like, okay, so who are they going to root for in the final? And then they just sort of started doing and eyeing at the actual homers. But it was a strange one-man rooting section until then.
It is wild how singular the adoration for Julio is in this city. I'm sure there are other examples of this, if not currently, then like in recent and not so recent baseball history. But the specifics of a team that is not incredible but not terrible. Like, it's not a team that's terrible and they only have one good player and that's why people love him. And it's not a team that's like won the world. It's not Derek Jeter. Like, it's not like the team that's like like a dynasty and there's a leader. It's just they have a lot of likable and lovable guys, and of all the guys, they like and love Julio the most. Like,
it's like
just
this one
far and away.
This one showed up and was an amazing rookie when they went to the playoffs finally. So they're like, him. He's the one.
He's the one. His face is on all the buses. He's doing all the media. He's hosting the parties. It's like, and last year, which we should have seen this coming, and I should not have written that column. At the end of last All-Star game in LA, I was like, wow, this All-Star game was really about Julio Rodriguez and what a future superstar he is and how much everybody loves him. And I knew at the time we were going to be in Seattle. So that was just dumb planning. That was taking the easy road for current Hannah in a way that hurt future Hannah. Because then it was this year, and I was like, I guess I can't just write that column again.
Change the name. Change the
once
dates.
Again, it is the Julio show. I have to say, though, I think that the order that the Derby went in deprived Julio of a home run Derby win, because he hit a record-setting 41 home runs in the first round to eliminate Pete Alonso. He went first. Pete then went on to only hit, I think, 21 home runs, which means Julio hit like 19 more home runs than he had to and was gassed for the rest. I was like, if he had gone second, he could have stopped after 23 home runs, gotten a nice long break, had some home runs in the tank, because the same thing happened to 2023 Home Run Derby champion Vlad Guerrero Jr. in 2019 when he set the then record with 40 home runs, was gassed, and then got lost. And then lost. I think if you can't hit 40 home runs in one round and have enough energy to complete the Derby, as it turns out.
Yeah, I will say it was not like a random order. They seeded them based on how many home runs they have this year. So hit more home runs.
Hit more home runs.
You can hit fewer home runs in the Derby and still win.
Somebody asked, so we should say Vlad Guerrero, in case you somehow got to this point and don't know, Vlad Guerrero Jr. won the Derby. It was cute because his dad has won the Derby. And a couple things came up in his little post-Derby press conference that I thought was cute. One, people asked, did you learn to pace yourself from that first Derby? And he was like, no. Everyone was telling me to go slower, but you can't go slower. You're just hitting home runs.
The ball is still coming and you still have to hit it.
Right. And he was like, nope, it just worked out better this time. Somebody asked how he would do in a Derby against his father. And he said that if it was the timed Derby like we have now, he would win. But if it was the outs version like they used to have, his dad would win, which is a very diplomatic answer. He did not specify, and the question asker did not specify if they meant like his dad right now, or like, I was like,
his
is this
dad
like a time
prime?
Is this a time traveling thing? Is Vlad 5 in one of these scenarios? What's happening?
Toddler Vlad.
I am. The Derby is a really good in-person event in a way that like All-Star kind of isn't, especially because All-Star does the fun things with the broadcast that we didn't really get to experience. However, I do wish I had watched the Derby if only to see, I heard that there was like good baby Vlad at the Derby, little interstitials. That would have been fun. Is that everything from All-Star that we want to talk about? Oh, Rob Manfred gave a press conference. Rob Manfred gave a press conference, as he does at every All-Star. There's a BBWA, Baseball Writers Association of America luncheon. And both Tony Clark, the head of the union, and Rob Manfred, the commissioner of baseball, speak to the media, take questions. And I left thinking, I feel like we've heard from Rob a lot lately because none of this was new.
Yeah, the main subject of conversation at this, aside from some chatter about the A's again, was whether the league would change the pitch timer rules for the postseason because the players want some tweaks, and I don't even think it's postseason specific. I think they just want tweaks, and they think, oh, the postseason is a time where maybe we could justify it. Mm-hmm. I don't think this is going to happen. I think we talked about it for like 40 minutes at this luncheon, and nothing will change whatsoever. So yes, that's my take on this.
The players want a few extra seconds on the pitch timer. They're lumping September in as well. They're kind of like in both the postseason, the chase, and the postseason. And I don't think they're being ridiculous, if only because, as I think we talked about on a podcast, it's like, we're changing rules. Ask for what you want, and they want more time.
Oh, they should totally ask for what they want.
That's what they want. They want more time. And I even do kind of see there are individual moments in the postseason where, like, if only because the crowd is being really loud or there's like a lot of commotion, that like very reasonable to think that a player might want a few extra seconds to just take a few deep breaths. And we'll see how it goes without them getting that, because you're right, I don't think they're going to get it. And somebody asked Rob Manfred specifically about the fact that we have the extra innings runner on second in the regular season, but not in the postseason. Why is that different than not wanting to change the pitch clock for the postseason? I didn't phrase that well. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
why are you unwilling to change that rule when you change the runner on second rule? And I thought his answer was actually like perfect. I was like, oh, that is the answer. He said, because the runner on second in extra innings rule is by definition game deciding. If the game is going to end, it's because that guy is going to score. So by putting him on second, you are directly impacting the way in which the game ends. Whereas, especially because, as they are so proud and touting, they being Major League Baseball, pitch clock violations have gotten really low. The point is for there to not be pitch clock violations, either in a regular season game or in a postseason game. The point is for them to simply play faster without that rule having any actual like obvious or singular effect on any outcome.
It mostly
which is a good answer.
That's how it works. There are not, there are just not crazy pitch timer violations deciding games. That is not a thing that's happening.
Yes. Although, as you heard me say to some MLB people afterwards, I think that they're riding too heavily on this line of like, because people will say, like, look, I think I don't have the quote in front of me, but Rob said specifically, I think, like, of course we don't want a pitch timer violation to determine the outcome or to end a postseason or a World Series game. However, we sort of don't think that'll happen. The pitch clock violations are down, whatever. And I said to some members of the commissioner's office afterwards, I said, I don't think you need to add that caveat. If a postseason game ends on a pitch clock violation, that's sometimes they end on bummers. Sometimes a guy walks in the winning run, or there's a lazy fly ball pop-up to end the game. Like the rules are the rules, and the games end the way the games. I've been at a game, a postseason series that ended on a controversial check swing call. So like, yeah, every rule in the book has the potential to be part of the very end of a postseason game. And that is not necessarily a flaw. Like, we don't have to, and if that happens, we'll all write about it, I'm sure. And that's good because I need content. But I don't think it's like, that isn't the rule not working. At this point, pitch clock violations for strikeouts are just a way you can strike out. And you can foul tip it into the catcher's glove. Like, there's like some really anticlimactic ways that a guy can strike out. He can whiff at a ball in the dirt, and that would be a bummer of a strikeout to end a postseason game too. But sometimes that's what happens.
You know, the only way Manfred could have answered the question about the man on second rule better is, this
he
is
could
how
have said we're getting rid of it in the regular season.
This is how he could have answered it to win some Twitter points, which he very rarely does. He could have just said, well, because that rule's bad and the pitch timer is good. Yeah.
Yes, that's
it. That's pretty much
yes.
pretty much
we made
the
a
gist of
mistake
it.
with that one, but the players now kind of like it because they didn't love these super long games, which is fine. This was a very pro Manfred, so we should say that he also said some dumb stuff about Oakland, but you can go read it. Did you see that The Athletic reported? I think they
Talked
didn't
to
have
the mayor.
first.
Yeah.
Yes, they spoke to the mayor, I believe, perhaps a local Bay Area paper. I'm really sorry that I don't remember which one it was. The Oakland mayor came to Seattle to make an in-person pitch for the very first time to Rob Manfred to be like, why did you say that we didn't try to keep the team? We did. I don't know that will change anything. However, I did read the reporting about this, and man, I admire her gumption, and I want it to work out for the Oakland fans. There were sell the team chants very briefly because there weren't that many Oakland A's All-Stars during the game.
Brent Rooker, yes.
There was a guy in a Cell shirt with a sign outside the park. So that continues to be a pretty significant storyline that just didn't spike in any particular way at All-Star. Okay, should we play a game?
Let's play a game. This is a quick and easy game and All-Star themed. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you two players who have been All-Stars. You're going to tell me which one has been an All-Star more times.
Okay.
It's not about, whether he played in the game. It's about whether he was selected to the team, what it says on Baseball Reference, Okay. Freddie Freeman or Joey Votto?
Oh. Freddie Freeman has been an All-Star a lot. When you said the first name, I thought, it's going to be him. And then you said Joey Votto. It could be him. Freddie Freeman?
It is Freddie Freeman, yes.
Yes.
Braves fans really helping.
Yeah,
Braves fans get their guys in. Yeah.
Braves fans and Rangers fans are really stuffing the balance.
Yeah. Clayton Kershaw or Sandy Koufax?
Oh, Kershaw.
Yes, it is Kershaw. Kershaw's pretty much already had a longer peak than Sandy Koufax, even though Sandy Koufax was incredible for some amount of time. Much more recent, Ronald Acuna Jr. or Vladimir Guerrero Jr.?
Acuna got hurt before the All-Star game that year that he was on. Vlad?
No, it's Acuna.
Oh.
He's been very good since the moment he got up, and I think he came up a year before Vlad.
How many do they each have?
I believe it's 3-2. I can try to check this real
down.
quick.
Okay.
I did not keep the.
It seemed like that might be part of the game.
Yeah, it's 4-3. It's 4-3. Acuna has 4. Yes, and Vlad has 3. Okay, particularly silly one. J.D. Martinez or DJ LeMahieu?
J.D. Martinez.
It is J.D. Martinez, yes. Closer battle, Craig Kimbrell or Kenley Jansen?
Ooh, I saw that they had like a little closer conversation about how they should each go for 500 saves.
Both
that's just me.
Possibly going to the Hall of Fame.
That's just me killing time. Craig Kimbrell.
Yeah, this is Kimbrell. Kenley did not have as many as I expected. Craig has a lot more than him.
I feel like Craig Kimbrell is always in the All-Star game.
Yeah,
I was surprised to see him this year. I got to be honest.
Perpetually there. And then he closed the game. Rob Thompson was like, well, he's my closer. And Rob Thompson, Phillies manager, was managing the game because the World Series managers from last year do it. And he just brought in his guy to finish it off. And it almost did not work. Ozzy Albies or Bo Bichette?
Oh. Ozzy Albies.
Yeah, this is Albies. He's been up longer than you think.
Yes, he has. That was exactly what my thought was like, Wait a minute. How many more seasons has Ozzy Albies played than Bo Bichette? I think it's like a pretty, I mean, not significant, but like, yeah, I think Ozzy Albies has been around a long
he'd
time.
be approaching free agency if not for the crazy deal he signed with the Braves. Aaron Judge or Roger Maris?
Oh, gosh. Roger Maris?
It's Maris, but it won't be for long. I don't think Aaron Judge will probably catch him next year and pass him the year after, unless he really takes a turn for the worse.
Wait, we didn't do this in our last pod, and I wanted to do this in our last pod, so I'm just going to ask you the question now. We're just both going to go on the record right now.
Yeah.
Will Aaron Judge be back this season? Yes or no?
Yeah.
I'm going to go no. Perfect. Excellent.
You don't think
Great.
so?
No, I don't think he will.
Okay. Okay.
We can discuss that later. Continue with your game.
Last question. Shohei Ohtani or Babe Ruth?
Wait, is it going to be that I don't know when they invented the All-Stars game. Shohei Ohtani.
It is. It's
Okay.
Ohtani. Because, the All-Star game did not exist until very late in Ruth's career. So he went to 2 All-Star games, which is really all of the All-Star games he could have possibly been in. But Ohtani's already been in 3. So
You know what? This is like how they don't credit Babe Ruth with enough home runs, because it used to be that if you hit a walk-off home run, but there were enough guys on base that your run wouldn't have counted, that they can count it as a home run. So Babe Ruth,
it's kind of like that.
Getting just shafted by the vagaries of record keeping in history.
Yeah, just another way Shohei Ohtani has surpassed Babe Ruth.
I feel like I did pretty well in that game.
Yeah, that was good.
Good job, me. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back with a conversation about the evolution of the baseball game and how technology and shrinking draft pools are affecting the paths for guys to both the majors and also the All-Star game. So one of the main media attractions of All-Star Day or All-Star Week is there's like a media availability where you can ask everybody lots of questions. Ostensibly, you can't actually because it's really crowded, but you go into it thinking that's what you're going to get to do. And I have some stories that are coming that are sort of based on reporting I did around there. But one of the things that I was asking guys that sort of didn't quite pan out into a story was, how has the game changed the most during your career? We should have gotten into this in a different way by saying there's a lot of really young All-Stars this year, and that's been a major talking point going into this game. It's been a major talking point just around baseball for a couple of years now. It's like, wow, the game is so young. Everyone who's really good is so young. The guys come up and they're so young and they're so good right away when they're still so young. And that manifested in there being a lot of really young All-Stars. That doesn't mean they were all young. So I want to talk to some of the guys who've been around a little bit longer about what has changed the most. And you can guess what they said. Guess what they said.
They said all the players were too young.
No, you not. I mean, what did they say? What's changed?
Yeah. They said they would not be All-Stars now because of the way...
You're spoiling it. What changed?
I don't know.
Technology. There's been a lot of technology in baseball. Okay.
I was like, I do not know the answer, clearly.
There's been a lot of technology, a lot of analytics, a lot of data. Maybe you've heard Moneyball happened, then Sabermetrics. Bill James, he's a guy. You have your job, and you're very good at it. It's a lot of data in baseball these days. It's changing everything. It's the major story for the past decade, 2 decades, ending in Shohei Ohtani, and then that's going to be the story for the next decade. But then we'll probably go back to talking about technology. Okay, so yes, everybody talked about how the technology is so different. The evaluations of guys is so different. And by everybody, I mean Sonny Gray said probably technology. Technology's been the biggest change that I've seen, for better, for worse. That's probably the biggest thing. Nick Castellanos, this is similar, but he said it in an extremely Nick Castellanos way. He said, I would say the tag of education carries more weight than the tag of wisdom. The people who are educated on analytics and statistics and all these complicated metrics have more pull in an organization and the large decisions than, let's say, when I first came up. And then he mentioned like special advisors like Al Trammell, Al Kaline, and Willie Horton. People who played the game, felt the game, that kind of thing. So he's saying guys who are on the data side have more influence than guys who are on the sort of former player side. Freddie Freeman said a slightly different thing. This is maybe what you're talking about. He said when I first came in, there would be like one rookie on the team. And now in today's game, there could be 3 or 4 and they're superstars, which is amazing. He said, when I came up, I was just trying to keep my head above water. And these guys are hitting home runs. You've got Corbin Carroll, blah, blah, blah. And then he said, and I think it's cool. It's cool for the game. He's like, me? How do you do, fellow children? I love that you're all here. I'm not threatened. And another sort of theme of All-Star Week the last couple of years is the draft is much smaller. They slashed the number of rounds basically in half because they've also shrunk the minor leagues. Basically, everything is sort of winnowing down to this. How do we most efficiently get potential baseball players from amateurs to literally all-star level in as straight a line and as efficient a path as possible? And that means drafting fewer guys, but more guys with higher potential, having smaller minor leagues, well, for cost-saving reasons, but also because they think like we don't need as much diamond in the rough development. We can sort of target the development. And then there's this manifestation where rookies are just like armed with a lot of data and they've come up with all of this data. So they're better prepared to utilize it. And then they're really good when they get started. The result is some of these older guys were like, I asked them, do you think you would have had the same kind of career? Would you be here as an all-star today if you were your same personality coming up through the ranks now? And Sonny Gray said no. He said probably less likely, to be honest with you. He's not an analytics-y kind of guy. He said, I don't know if it would have been good for me at a young age because I just went out there and gripped it and ripped it. And it's worked for him. And Nick Castellanos, same thing. Would you be here today if you were coming up now? Probably not. I don't think the Tigers would have been as patient with me in the earlier parts of my career, learning how to play third base, getting my feet under me as a major leaguer. The stats probably would have shown that it'd be better for me to be platoon for certain guys. And then he said, I'm very thankful for Al Avila and Dave Dombrowski allowing me to grow as a baseball player. And Freddie Freeman didn't say that exact thing, but he did say, like, my first couple of years, I felt like I was just trying to keep my head above water. He said he didn't think that, like, he got to a place where he felt confident in his game and other guys were sort of complimenting his game. It took a while until like 19, he said. It was like 9 or 10 years in that he started getting told that he's like a really great player by other players. And that got me thinking just about like, do we like this? Is this okay? I mean, there's still going to be the same number of major leaguers and all-star players and cool plays happening, but is it bad if the path becomes more linear?
So I think 2 things. I think 1, we don't have to like the winnowing of the minor leagues and the winnowing of the draft and kind of the shrinking of the pool of guys who might surprise you. But also I think these particular players are selling themselves short. I think they are not correct about their own levels of like ability. Sonny Gray, he may not think he's super into analytics or anything like that, but he's a very good analytic player example of a guy who has picked up new pitches. I mean, that's the kind of the thing. It's like learn pitches that work with your skill set. He added a sweeper, and it's been really great with the Twins, and he's going to get a new contract this offseason because he's adapted in ways that maybe he didn't think it was based on the numbers, but it's very much on the cutting edge of how pitchers work right now. He's doing that. Nick Castellanos might be correct that he might have had a different route if he came up now. I would argue that maybe someone just should have let him hit instead of playing third base way earlier, but whatever. That's fine.
He played center field in the All-Star
He played center field in the All-Star game, and it did not backfire somehow.
Yes.
I don't know how that happened, but I think the best players do rise to the top, and there is still plenty of room for guys to evolve in the major leagues. It is not like every player on every team is a 22-year-old superstar. There are a lot of roster spots where guys are working to figure out the best version of themselves. And I don't think I cannot imagine we will ever optimize the game or narrow the pool so much that ceases to be the case.
Yeah. I think they are, right. I think there's sort of the like human psychological aspect to this, which is they are envisioning, what if I started my major league career and suddenly there was all this data and I was expected to be able to implement that or whatever. But what's actually happening, and what would happen if they could somehow go back in time and be children now, is that the guys who are, it's not new to the guys who are reaching the majors now. You know what I mean? Like perhaps what Nick Castellanos and Sonny Gray are thinking about is like, wow, when I got to the majors, my understanding of how to deal with scouting reports and whatever else was so, not rudimentary sounds rude, but just so new that I would have been overwhelmed by the amount of data that we have now. But the guys who are coming up now are used to seeing that kind of data, that amount of data. So I think you're right that like perhaps a little bit they're just having a hard time imagining what would it be like to have lived your whole life in an era with this kind of way of teaching and appreciating and understanding baseball. Like they didn't, when they watched baseball as children, they weren't watching it through the lens of analytics in the same way that people are now. And so the guys who come up now, like the sort of the impact that being a generation of baseball players who have been consuming baseball through the lens of analytics for their entire life, that impact is like a much bigger thing that we should talk about sometime. I do, right. It's like they are on to something. And you're right, like the draft and minor league aspect is maybe the more salient point, which is like, do we care if a guy who would have gone in the 38th round, but gone on to be like a cool, fun major leaguer, doesn't become a major leaguer and instead someone else entirely becomes a major leaguer? I just think that that's like we can't answer that. Like it's such a weird question to think about, but that is like Keith Hernandez drafted in the 42nd round, famously. Like, well, that would be a loss if we didn't have Keith Hernandez, but we'd have someone else. I don't know who that guy would have been.
It would be, but it's tough to, I was talking to the Arizona Diamondbacks assistant GM, Emil Salde, who helped draft Corbin Carroll. That's why I was talking to him. But I asked him a little bit. He was with the Red Sox when they drafted Mookie Betts. And Mookie Betts is a 5th rounder. But something he said at the time, there's a whole combination of things that affect the draft, but used to affect the draft way more. And one of the things that used to affect the draft way more is just you couldn't get a scout to see guys sometimes. Mookie Betts played basketball so well that his team went to like the state title game, so he wasn't playing baseball yet at the normal time. Then there was some bad weather, and it's like, if you were Mookie Betts in 1977, that means you just never got seen, you didn't get drafted as high, people just couldn't tell if you were good. If you're Mookie Betts in the late 2000s when he was drafted, it means that the Red Sox gave him a little hand-eye coordination test, and he was like the best guy they've ever seen. So they were like, we're going to take him. And they went and watched his basketball games and saw his athleticism. They had, the early bits of batted ball inclinations of, okay, this guy can do things. And all of that has advanced so much that by the time you get to Corbin Carroll 4 years ago, he was from up here in Seattle, and it rained his entire season. They only saw him take BP before his high school games twice, but he played for the Team USA national team, and they had batted ball data there, and that convinced them whole hog that he was a first-round pick. So the short thing of what I'm saying is, if Keith Hernandez existed in the 2023 universe, he just wouldn't be a 42nd rounder. He'd be like a 3rd rounder. Like he would just be found. Like I'm not trying to, say optimization is good in an entirety sense, but there are a lot of ways of finding players that have gotten better since the days of the, we found Mike Piazza in the 68th round or whatever. And I just don't think Mike Piazza would be a 68th rounder now. I think if he were not in the top 20 rounds, he would probably at least be recruited by a good college program, and then he would come out later. So I'm questioning whether we're missing that many all-star level players. I understand the narrative ding of it, though.
No, I actually think you did a really good job of explaining that. This podcast is secretly a podcast about time travel and how we're not that good at imagining. No, I think, you know what I mean? It's like, I actually think it's really interesting that you're right. You're making the same point that weirdly, we didn't mean for this to be like a through line made about like Vlad Guerrero Jr. and his dad. And how could they actually play in a derby against each other? You know, it's like when you try to envision different career paths in different eras, this is a baseball thing. And a sports thing. People love to talk about what if this career had happened in a different era. And you're right. I think you are making a really like interesting, smart point that we're not, when we have those conversations, we're not broadening the context enough to think about what other factors would have affect, whether with the, right. If Sonny Gray had grown up reading Fangraphs, he'd be a different player, even if he was, you know what I mean? Like, if he's not an analytics guy now, maybe he would have been if they had analytics for his favorite players. And right, Keith Hernandez wouldn't have been a 42nd round draft pick if we had better data, and Mookie Betts wouldn't have been a 5th round draft pick if we had. Like, it is really interesting to think like our ability to understand, our ability to compare, so much of sports is built on the fallacy that we are making meaningful comparisons across eras. We're just not. Like, it's just so different. And we're going to bring this pod full circle. Similarly, I think when we talk about Shohei Ohtani and what he means for doing the two-way thing, the future trends, whatever, that we're not, this is both time and location are context factors that matter. We're not taking into account the way that his specifics of growing up in Japan and playing in the MPB. Like when we talk about like, could this guy have been a two-way player? It's like, well, what do you mean? Do you mean like if he went to an American high school and went to an American college and was taken in the American draft and went through the minor leagues, would he be a two-way player? Or do we mean like if he had been born in Japan and which is not to say that what Shohei Ohtani is doing is not like truly mind-bogglingly otherworldly, like the sheer probabilities on someone being in the top 5% of two skills for which the top percent is like considered superstar is really, really, I don't know. Perhaps there truly never would have been another Shohei Ohtani, but like, like I talked to a guy at the Futures game who had been a two-way player through college and then he got drafted. And he said, we're going to bring it full circle. He said, like, before I got drafted, I knew the teams that were interested in me as a pitcher. This is Spencer Schwallenbach, who got drafted by the Braves. I knew the teams that were interested in me as a pitcher, the teams that were interested in me as a shortstop, and the teams that were interested in me as both. I knew that. So he's like, I was watching the draft, and I knew whenever they announced who drafted me, that I would see what my future was. And it was the Braves, and they did not want him to do the two-way thing. They wanted him to just pitch, and so now he's just a pitcher. And it's like those sliding door moments. It's not as simple as just saying like, well, I mean, if Spencer Schwallenbach goes on to be like a Cy Young all-star pitcher, we can't just say like, well, if X team had drafted him, he would have been a Cy Young MVP all-star shortstop. Or if this team had drafted him, he would have been the next Shohei Ohtani, but this team drafted him, so he's a pitcher. Like, it doesn't, the sliding doors of baseball, of sports in particular, don't work that way because like the development has so much to do with the end result.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult to take a guy, put him in any different context. It's not even like, you know, if you took Schwallenbach, like you said, and put him on the Rays, it's like, what would happen? It's like, no idea.
Right.
It's any variable you change just starts to change too much. But I think the biggest thing is just the fact that we have advanced so far in a lot of ways. It's just hard to appreciate when you're in this era how much different it would have been from previous ones. And the fact that it is different is very obvious, but the ways it affects you can be tough to grasp.
Well, and also, this is what the note that we'll end on. We think about the guys who are in the game now who wouldn't be in the game if other circumstances happened. But those guys would be replaced with other guys who aren't in the game now because circumstance. I don't mean that. I don't like mean that in a flippant way. I mean genuinely, like it's the amount of skill and luck and opportunity and like determination that goes into getting a guy to the All-Star game. Like when you try to like work backwards from a guy being at the All-Star game to seeing all of the possible sliding doors of their entire life that got them there, it's like you just can't. That ultimately it's like every guy who gets to the All-Star game has had such an interesting path of some combination of context and personality and perseverance and athleticism and genetics and era and guys they met along the way and high school teachers who said the right thing to them and minor league coaches who told them something or like, you know what I mean? It's like, and we love those stories and we're not going to lose those stories. We're not going to like lose, like even, you know what I mean? Like we're not going to lose like there was a pitcher in the minor leagues who showed me his grip and then he went on to do nothing, but I'm here at the All-Star game. Yeah. Like,
the stories will not get worse because there's a Rapsodo machine involved in some of them.
Yeah. All right. You convinced me. I didn't think you were going to convince me, but you convinced me. We're going to do a very quick bandwagon and then we're going to wrap this up and you're going to go get a rental car because you get to stay here in Seattle. Ooh, I didn't mean that to be a transition, but it is. I wish I was staying here in Seattle because I am bandwagoning Seattle, the city of Seattle. It has been excellent. Thank you to Seattle, a genuinely delightful host of a city. I kept saying whenever I encountered people who work at the commissioner's office this week, I made like a joking point of being like, we should do this every year. I love it being in Seattle. Let's do it here every year. And they were like, I don't think that's going to happen. Because lots of cities want to host the All-Star game. But can they do it as well as Seattle? I don't know. Like this was your time for seeing the ballpark, yes?
Yes, this was my first time in Seattle.
What'd you think of the ballpark?
I thought the ballpark was terrific. It is seemingly clearly the best stadium that has a roof of any sort.
Yes!
Yeah, it is retractable. It was not on at any point, I don't think, during this week.
It was closed
during
one
media
of the
day.
mornings.
During media day, yeah, it might have been closed. But for any of the main events, it was open. It was beautiful here. All of the amenities were great. The food selection in the ballpark is terrific. And Seattle, I don't know if you're going to get to this, but it has your personal favorite combination of matcha soft serve and matcha soft serve.
Yes, I have had good matcha, good soft serve, and I have not yet had matcha soft serve, but perhaps that's what I will do before I get on my plane today to go back to the East Coast. Yes, I think T-Mobile is the top of the list of the underrated ballparks. I'd have to think a little hard about whether or not it's my absolute favorite, but it is not in the conversation. When we talk about the Giant Stadium, whatever that is called now, in Camden Yards, and then there's the historical ones in Petco. That's always got great weather. We never talk about T-Mobile. T-Mobile has been amazing. It's new and it has great like new amenities, but it doesn't look the same as like the Mets and the Phillies and the Nationals. All these ballparks like look exactly the same. It has like interesting architectural features like the retractable roof. It's walkable to downtown, if not like right downtown, like Wrigley or Fenway is. It's just a really good ballpark. It's got a good skyline behind it when the roof is open. Last night when we left the game, it smelled like the ocean, for better and for worse, but that adds a specific texture to the experience. It stayed light until like 10 o'clock, which was honestly a little bit disconcerting, especially if you were still on East Coast time.
It's like halfway to Alaska, you know.
Yes. I have no intention of ever coming back to the city when it's not the middle of summer. And for that reason, it will continue to exist in my head as like one of the best baseball cities you could go to. Everyone talks about how far it is, and I'm sure it was like kind of a pain for a lot of the players. Felt really bad for the Rays who were like just here like a week ago, less than a week ago. They couldn't be further. That's rude. Don't do that. Don't put the team that has to travel the furthest for the All-Star game at the city where the All-Star game is going to be right beforehand. I get that. It's very far. As you and I talked about this many times over the past couple of days, you would not want to live here because it's very far. I don't think I would want to live here because it's very far from everything, but highly recommend.
Visiting. Yes.
If Seattle Tourism wants to sponsor our podcast, we this is not sponsored, and we would make an equally impassioned plea to people. Like, great ballpark. My bandwagon is great ballpark trip. Like plan a trip to Seattle. When your favorite team, now that there's a balanced schedule and everybody plays everybody, even if you're an NL team, when your team plays the Seattle Mariners, you should go to Seattle and watch a ball game there because it's a great experience. Unless it's in like March, in which case it's probably pretty cold. So don't do that.
But there's a roof.
Okay. But there's a roof. But it's still cold because it's open air, even when the roof is over it. It's less of a roof and more of an awning situation, like a gazebo. It's actually like a gazebo ballpark.
The retractable gazebo.
That's all we've got for you this week because we're tired and we have to go and you're spending some days enjoying Seattle and I have to fly back to New York. That's it. That wraps up All-Star, the colloquial first half. When we come back, we will have to talk about the trade deadline and then we'll continue to do that for like basically a month and every pod will start and end with being like, I don't think they're going to trade Shohei Ohtani until they either do or do not. So you can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Hannah R. Crizer. He's at Z Crizer. You could find us on the other various social medias. I'm looking at the rundown, which we only changed some parts of from last week. And so it says, make sure you're following both of us on Threads. But did you thread it all this week?
I think I threaded once this morning.
We will try to thread more. Please follow us on Threads and we will try to thread more. Follow us on Instagram. If you've made it this far, subscribe to the podcast at the YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review. Tell a friend. And we'll be back next week with another episode of The Bandwagon.